Hello and welcome to episode 42 of Talking Shit About. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and each month I bring on a guest to talk about something they love, something they hate, and hopefully by the end we've all learned something. This month we're talking about the troubled teen industry, so it's definitely not a fun topic. We don't go into a lot of details because we're not trying to re-traumatize folks, but there will be mention of suicide and self-harm, child sex abuse, and sexual assault. So if those topics are triggering for you, just keep yourself safe and take care of yourself. Without further ado, let's go ahead and talk some shit.
I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I have friends that are firefighters and I know that they use soap.
And she was screaming at me over soup.
Fuck this, I am not ever talking to a Scientologist again. These people are all insane.
I'm putting my bricks in the dumpsters, motherfuckers. Do you see me, bitches? I'm throwing my bricks. And he's just like chucking bricks.
Hello, everyone. I'm sitting here today with Fairy, and they are going to tell us about the troubled teen industry. Fairy, how are you doing?
I am doing as best as any of us can be in the current state of things in the world, you know.
Yep. Yeah, we're recording this shortly after the election, November 11th. So, yeah, everything's still fresh in our brains. Fairy, so let's go ahead and just jump right into it. For someone who's never heard the term, could you kind of define the troubled teen industry and what it is?
You know, it's really funny that today I was going to put this deposit down on an apartment, and my landlord was like, "Oh, what kind of podcast are you going on?" And I was like, "Do you know what the troubled teen industry is?" And he was like, he tried to logic it through the words, right? Some sort of industry that takes advantage of troubled teens. And I was like, that is a really good place to start with just the words, right? Troubled teen industry. But really, it's a lot more sinister than that. The troubled teen industry has been around so much longer than I thought. I entered a program on my half birthday when I turned 13 and a half in the year 2004. That's 20 years ago. But long before I was a survivor or even entering a program, there were other people entering programs. The troubled teen industry is essentially a bunch of places like wilderness therapy, residential treatment centers, many of which operate under religious contexts. It includes conversion therapy as well. And these are unregulated and unwatched programs where parents or sometimes the court will send a kid with behavioral health issues to complete strangers who usually don't have qualification. And people die. People have been abused and dying in places like this as long as they've been around. There's a lot of great resources that can probably explain the history and stuff better. But a big thing to note about the troubled teen industry in comparison to other places like psych wards is you're there for a long amount of time. You don't know when you're going home. And the way that they change your behavior is through brainwashing.
So you were 13 when you first got sent to, I was going to say, was it a camp or what kind of
So
program was it?
I've been to 4 programs, I would say, although there's like a debate on one of the boarding schools that I went to briefly being lumped in there. So it started with I had attempted suicide when I was 13, and I went to a psych ward. From there, my parents reached out to an educational consultant, which is something that's not a lot. It's not always part of your journey into the troubled teen industry, but they suggest a placement to your parents. These days, they usually start with wilderness programs, and with my parents, I ended up at a place called Falcon Ridge Ranch that's located in Virgin, Utah. They are the only program that I've been to that is still open, and they are one of the worst in Utah now as a result. I was in that program for a year. And I was not making enough progress because I was very defiant and stubborn and honestly a scared little kid. So they decided to make an example out of me. Falcon Ridge Ranch had opened up in 2003, so they had maybe been open a year by the time I showed up. And the example they made was to send me to a wilderness program where I made a backpack out of sticks. I wasn't allowed to interact with other people in the group until I learned how to make a fire with sticks and stones. We hiked, 7 miles every day, rain or snow. and that was supposed to break me, and it kind of did. So I went back to the first program, and then more programs. Total, I was gone for about 2.5 years, and in between programs, the way that my parents would transport me if they couldn't be there were through what you have heard referred to as goons, paid kidnappers. For other people, that functions as, they come to your own house and a pre-arranged time with your parents and kidnap you. But for me, I was already in these programs. Going in between them, my parents would sign me over custody-wise to these transporters to take me to the next program. So 2.5 years, 13 and a half to almost 16. My last program was actually the first ever weight loss troubled teen program in California.
So what was the selling point for these programs? Like, what is the promise that they're giving people?
So when I've watched these documentaries, I think part of what made me wake up after, 20 years of just not really talking about it or thinking about it, I was watching a documentary called Hell Camp on Netflix. It's about wilderness programs. And this older woman is holding a little dog in her lap and talking about how she sent her son to a wilderness program probably in the 90s. Now, I was born in 1990, so that's, the first sign is, oh my gosh, this has been happening longer than I've existed. But then hearing her say this specific line that a lot of people who have been through programs have had their parents say over the years, which is, if I didn't do this, you were going to die. There's this aspect of brainwashing with your parents too, because the industry preys on their desperation. They manipulate that. Back in my time, if you think about it, like they were passing out glossy brochures that made it look like I was going to horse camp for 2 years, or, this cushy rehab that you'd expect, celebrities to be at. But that was the brochure. The reality was very, very different. Our communication was monitored, so we couldn't tell our parents what was really going on. And plenty of parents probably would not have done that if they knew the reality, but they were desperate. My parents, well, my mother still to this day says, if I didn't do that, you were going to die. And over the last few months, we've been talking about things, and I've gotten her to accept and agree that the likelihood of a child dying in a program is also very strong. My mom says that she felt that it was more likely that I would die if I didn't go to one. So to answer the question, essentially, why do parents send their kids there? It's because they're desperate, and these people act like they are the experts when they're not. Many of them, I know in one of my programs specifically, there was a guy who became faculty at many other programs beyond just mine. And I looked him up recently, and he failed to qualify for social work licensing. And I got, before the pandemic, I was actually about to go for my master's in social work. So it's just absolutely mind-boggling that my mom would probably still sing his praises, but this man couldn't even pass a social work licensing, and he was and still is in charge of people's problem kids,
Yeah, that is, I can't believe how unregulated it is. It drives me up the wall. So I'd like to kind of go back to your personal story. So you mentioned before you got sent into the program, you were dealing with some suicidal thoughts, some suicidal attempts. This is kind of an abstract question, but what is the difference between a troubled teen and a regular teen? Like, are there any teens that aren't troubled?
Right? I mean, let's be for real. Every teenager is going through a hormone brain soup for like a while, and everything feels so sudden and immediate and like, oh my God, if he doesn't like me back, the world's going to be over, right? So, by nature, teenagers are moody, hormonal, impulsive, and grumpy at best, right? It's interesting, I've been through 4 programs, and looking back on the variety of situations that you'd encounter. So I'm going to bookmark that thought, the variety of situations you can encounter, because that's going to be the end message for me. So I go in there. My particular problems were a little unique. My parents had fought most of my life. I had developed a unique problem during potty training. where my parents had moved to different states and weren't living together, and I didn't see my dad. And as a 3-year-old, to me, this is all stuff that they hammered out with me in the troubled teen industry, but it was me trying to exercise control, so I just stopped going to the bathroom. And that problem, persisted. On top of that, I was sexually assaulted and blackmailed as a child by a friend who was only a year older than me. And also, I was born female. She's also born female. So that happened for like 5 years. Obviously, my parents fighting, the other stuff. I was getting depressed. I was cutting, and I was getting severely bullied at my new school. And faculty weren't really listening. So I felt there was nothing else to be done, and I tried to kill myself. And when I get to the troubled teen industry, I was very sheltered, a virgin. I was actually straight edge, and just very different from who I am now. Other girls there had severe drug problems. I remember watching a girl come down off heroin. Before I'd ever tried any kind of drugs, I'd seen what they did to people. She couldn't walk for like a week. They had to carry her around. So my problems were I was very sad and depressed, and other people were addicted to heroin at my age, or there were even just sad situations where it's like a girl's dad had remarried, and the stepmother felt that she couldn't bond with a teenager the same way that she could with the girl's younger siblings. So it was just a convenient place to stash her. It really, you'd have people from all walks of life. One of the things that I've noticed still persists is adopted kids. And I don't mean just like, there's this sinister aspect of different cultures and different races. Like Matt, the former governor of Kentucky, Matt something. Oh my gosh, how am I forgetting his name? Matt Bevin. He had an adopted son from Africa that he put in a program because, adoption is hard, especially when you're coming from another country. And once you get to teenage years, you're already dealing with the hormone brain soup. Of course, the adoption and where you belong is going to be part of that. But the kid gets sent to this program in Jamaica, which the same year it gets raided, and Matt Bevin just leaves his kid to become a ward of the state in Jamaica. When I was in a program 20 years ago, there was another girl from another country who was of a different race than her parents. And, it felt weird then. Like, why are you sending your kid so far away from you when what you need is to be integrated into the family instead of feeling like an outsider? Ultimately, you look at all the kids throughout the troubled teen industry, you look at the documentaries, and sometimes they're the artsy kids, sometimes they're the weird kids. And really, it just boils down to the family kind of just needed to integrate them more. They call them troubled teens and tell you not to take the reviews seriously because they're just troubled teens. They tell you that, these kids are doing whatever they're doing to manipulate you. But they never say the reality, which is a kid doesn't know how to communicate things. So what you think is manipulative or manipulation, whatever, is really just a kid trying to get their needs met, trying to communicate in the only way that they know how. I was self-harming because I felt unheard and unseen. I was being sexually assaulted. I was being bullied, and nobody had my back. Of course I felt that way. So to just narrowly, call them all troubled teens, really, there's such a variety of situations, of home lives, of problems. And the thing that I saw in all that time that was a common theme was just dysfunctional families and adults not willing to own up to their part in that.
Yeah, it sounds like what you needed was support and, like you said, somebody to have your back, but instead they just kind of shipped you off, which is the opposite of what you
Exactly.
needed, I'm sure. So how did being in the programs affect you compared to how it was, quote unquote, supposed to help you?
This is something I've reflected on a lot lately. Back then, there are different kinds of programs. The program that I was in, Falcon Ridge Ranch, that's the one I spent the most time in, so I call that, the program for me. But they had a sister program called Red Rock Canyon School, which was closed down for riots. They were different kinds of programs, and Red Rock was a threat they'd hold over you as well. Falcon Ridge Ranch was what's called positive peer culture, where essentially they try to use peer pressure to make you change your behavior. You have your friends narc on you. You have these girls that you live with, the congregate care. You know, they're supposed to be keeping you honest, and I can see why that sounds good on paper, but in reality, it ends up being just bullying and mini staff and just perpetuating all the problems. So with Red Rock, though, they were behavior modification, which is we are going to modify your behavior by any means necessary. They were very cruel. I have a friend who had been at Red Rock for a couple months before coming to Falcon Ridge Ranch. And Falcon Ridge Ranch, I believe, also sent her to a wilderness program too. And it's wild to look at our experiences and our overlap in time there. I'm bisexual. My friend is gay. And we had the same therapist who treated us very differently. My friend was encouraged to be more straight, and I was encouraged to avoid boys. I'm
Okay,
sorry,
go
I
ahead.
think I lost what was the initial question?
So, how did the experience affect you and change you like as a person?
Right. So, like I mentioned, you know, I was straight edge going in. I was gonna save my virginity and never do drugs or drink or anything like that. And it wasn't even for religious reasons or it was straight up mental illness on my part. Um, but then I get to the programs, and I remember this girl once telling me, like, I was nervous, and I was like, after I had fixed my little bathroom problems, you know, I was still in the program past that for a long, long time. Um, and I remember at a different program, I had asked this girl, like, what do you do if you like are spending the night at a guy's house and you have to go to the bathroom? Like, how do you cover up the smell if you didn't bring perfume with you? And like getting those kind of tips. So like if I'm getting those kind of tips about sex, I'm getting those kind of tips about everything. And by the time I got out, I had already determined, like, after watching that girl come down off heroin, I am never doing heroin, but I'm curious about pot a little bit, maybe. I might want to try alcohol. And I am definitely curious about sex. So in going to all these programs, I was exposed to other people's problems and I got to hear their stories, and they made me more curious than I had ever been before. I think that it had that opposite effect for my parents that they were not expecting. And after I got out, there was actually a period in time that I like within the first year disappeared for a weekend to go with the guy that I was dating. He was in a metal band and get drunk at his show and just not answer my phone for a weekend at 16. So, you know, wasn't a thing that I did at 13 and a half, that's for sure. But at 13 and a half, I was trying to meet grown men on the internet. So in general, I kind of had some problem behaviors that looking back, it's like I really just wanted someone to listen. I think so you have this aspect of you're learning the behaviors that other people have. But on top of that, the troubled teen industry, they know that it's kind of a band-aid because they don't want to piss off the parents that are their cash cows. So they don't really make the parents take responsibility for the dysfunctional family stuff more often than not. And when I was at the ranch, if you had a problem at home, you'd just call the ranch. So I did that for like 2 years after I got out. And it never really occurred to me back then that by 2008, and I got out in 2006, there were only like 3 staff left that remembered who I was. But there were more girls than ever. And, you know, they'd done more expansion and all of this stuff. So they're putting a Band-Aid on a problem and telling you to come back, to call back, whatever, because they know that eventually you'll end up back in their program. But they're only going to take you while you're a minor. So it's kind of the worst Band-Aid because they don't really fix your problems. They tell you to rely on them and to rely on other people with problems. And on top of that, there's the brainwashing. What they do is they take away your fight or flight response because, you know, you have grown men screaming in your face, you have adults restraining you, and sometimes your friends restraining you and fighting you. Yeah, what they really do is traumatize you into submission for the rest of your life.
And I imagine it's taken a lot of work and a lot of processing to undo a lot of that, if you can even undo it, right?
Well, I recently, luckily, have found another survivor who became a therapist who specializes in, you know, cults and brainwashing and troubled teen stuff. And I'll be starting with her next month. But I think about, when I first got out of programs and I was seeing therapists and I was seeing psychiatrists, and at some point I was like 20 and I wanted to talk about it. It had only happened 4 years ago, but the therapist at the time had no idea what I was talking about and really wanted me to lead it. And I will say, with the advent of social media, of Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all of that, people's stories are getting out. You can connect with other survivors, and that's an amazing thing because, back then there were no reviews. And sorry, I keep losing my train of thought.
Oh man, yeah, no, I was so intent on listening, I forgot where we were going to. I got kind of another question for you.
Yeah.
But have you ever been in a mental health institution like after you got out of the programs?
Oh, definitely. Gosh, actually, my industry is what I would say, because I wasn't a troubled teen forever. My industry experience did not stop at being a minor. In fact, when I was 18, I tried to kill myself again, ended up in a psych ward, and at that point, I think my parents got me involved with some like community mental health agency where I had a case manager. And with the case manager's help, my parents essentially got a conservatorship sort of thing where I was ordered to take medication. If I didn't take that medication, I would be put in this more severe psych ward where the minimum stay is 6 months and you can't even contact your family. And I was threatened with that for like 2.5 years, even when, I was seeing these psychiatrists that I didn't even remember my name half the time. I was taking these medications that kept making me gain weight, much like in the troubled teen industry. They had me on crazy high doses of things like Seroquel and Depakote. I gained 60 pounds in 2 months and they blamed it on me. So I wasn't in control of my own reproductive freedom. I had mentioned, I was engaged to somebody when I was 20 and we wanted to have kids, and the case manager and my mother said that if I got pregnant, they'd immediately start a CPS case together. I didn't get free of that stuff until I think when I was 21. And even then, it had become kind of routine for me that if I went into a mental health crisis, I always had a go bag ready to go spend some time in a psych ward and get my meds in order. But it turns out, after all this time and all the things that they diagnosed me with in the troubled teen industry, well, a lot of them have been removed from my chart. At 28, I got finally diagnosed with PTSD. Now, when I was in the troubled teen industry, you would assume that a kid saying, hey, I was sexually abused and blackmailed for 5 years, so that the abuse would continue. You'd think you'd want to work on that as a therapist, but because it was another girl, I had to beg for help for that to be acknowledged. And, more sexual assault from then on. I have had a lifetime of trauma, and I had a lifetime of trauma before I even turned 18. So not being diagnosed with PTSD absolutely impacted my ability to get help. Instead, I had borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder, specifically the one with mania, not hypomania, which not impaired, it was a roadblock. Some doctors didn't want to see me because they thought those two things combined were too severe. But the doctor that I see now is an amazing person. He was mentored by Bessel van der Kolk, the guy who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, which is like the Bible of trauma. And, with working with him, I was already diagnosed with ADHD before the troubled teen industry, and that has stuck. But, the borderline personality disorder is removed from my chart because it is a lot easier to explain my reaction to trauma in the moment as not a manic episode, but it's like, yeah, I don't know. I had gotten sexually assaulted and then did a bunch of crazy things that most people normally wouldn't do. Is it bipolar disorder, or is it just that was super traumatic and I didn't know how to handle it? I think that's something a lot of survivors actually end up encountering, is like they diagnose you with so many things to, number one, sedate you with all these medications, but also to bill your insurance and be able to get more and keep you there longer. So in the long run, it kind of just steered me back into psych wards and whatnot, because there were times I couldn't find a psychiatrist at all and wouldn't have access to medications, but I've been considered mentally disabled due to all the trauma and all this stuff. since I was 18. It's absolutely mind-boggling to look back. I haven't been in a psych ward in quite some time, and I've had time to really think about what those are like in comparison. And now I'm also realizing that there's a lot of there's like three big overall corporations in the troubled teen industry, but there's many other ones, and they sometimes will own like a child psych unit. Acadia owns one in my hometown for children experiencing behavioral problems, but Acadia also owns so many troubled teen industry residential programs where the minimum stay isn't 2 weeks. It's who knows, you know. They own wilderness programs. So now a parent could just walk through the wrong psych ward trying to get help for their kid for the first time and end up, you know, accidentally, well, not accidentally, but being misled into the industry in ways that, you know, my parents weren't misled, supposedly. And thinking about all the kids in programs right now, I mean, the numbers are anywhere from, like, at any given moment, it's like 100 to 120,000 kids are in programs. The 20 years that it's taken me to acknowledge all this trauma, the ways that I've tried to handle it, you know, trying constantly to improve myself, to get better, to work on my mental health without having this very important key that a lot of these problems aren't, it's not that they're not real, but they're mislabeled. And having to go back and look at the 20 years that feels wasted when I really needed help. And I spent my whole life needing help because the help I got was just that bad.
So it sounds like finding a therapist that understands your situation was pretty helpful. What are some other things that have been healing for you?
Well, lately I have, ever since, you know, like really trying to dig into this trauma and understand things, the question that keeps coming up for me is how many of my thoughts and impulses are mine? How many of them are part of this brainwashing? And so lately I've been writing lyrics and poetry. There's actually when I was in the industry, my parents and the program made me do a news interview, not like a video, but newspaper. And it's full of inaccuracies from, you know, what my mom says the first day I cut is, she says it was April 2004, but I entered the troubled teen industry in March of 2004. How's that possible? But on top of that, it says things like, you know, I have such a great way with words, and, you know, I have these unique writing skills that never would have been refined if I hadn't entered a program. Before I entered a program, I was on a competitive writing team in middle school. So not really. I read that and I got angry, and I was like, well, you know what? I was good at writing before you guys, and I was good at writing after you guys, and now I'm just going to write about you guys.
Yeah.
And then, you know, obviously having the opportunity to really share my story after years of not knowing the words, it's great to get that opportunity. On top of that, realizing that it's still going on, that it's going on in my own backyard. There's this sense of I need to help these kids in ways that I couldn't get help. And I was really incensed this year. You know, the documentary Teen Torture Inc. came out on HBO Max, and it's fantastic. Oh, it's fantastic. But after watching that, you know, I realized I live in Ohio, and the area that I grew up in has, our representative was J.D. Vance. Not my choice. Did not vote for that man. Did not.
Me either.
Yeah, right. All right. So, well, even as an Ohioan, I never would have voted for him. Gosh. So, you know, I started digging into that, and I had all these feelings about it. For me, it feels like the troubled teen industry is serving up problem children to horrifically abusive men and women and people that are now in power. Mitt Romney profited off of my abuse. So it pushed me to start getting involved. Up until this year, we had one career politician in Ohio that I could really say is good at his job. His name is Sherrod Brown. And he got voted out for this crypto bro named Bernie Moreno, who took $17,000 from Ohio troubled teen industry programs. Those same programs gave $19,000 to the president. And I gotta say, it feels like a kick in the nads, because I had just been getting the fight started. Now it feels like it's even harder. But you've also probably seen things like Paris Hilton was working on the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. So hers was actually more focused on research and accountability with these programs and making sure that their records are up to date. But even though that's kind of like, this is not an insult to Paris or anyone else, but previous things that people tried to pass were more about protections, restraints and blah, 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 and they always fizzle. But even this one, which is not about protections and restraints and is like kind of milquetoast in comparison, it's just research, did not pass yet, but it's probably not going to. So on my end, in my undergrad, which was in a completely different field, I did a web content analysis. And I believe that all the data we need to do that kind of research, it's already out there. You look at the reviews of the programs, you listen to a podcast episode, somebody talking about the program they were in, you look at news articles, you look at court cases, that data's already there. So I'm working to start a nonprofit based on funding research. Specifically, I'd like undergrads to do this research. It's a great thing to have on your resume when you apply for your master's, and it's an area that desperately needs research. So having something like that and providing that opportunity, that's important to me. I've been networking with other survivors who have, their own nonprofits that do other things. There's one called Survivors Unrestrained, which helps. The aim is to help all survivors get access to resources. You think about an 18-year-old coming out of a program that they've been in for 2 years, doesn't know how to get their social security card, doesn't know how to apply for any kind of benefits. And sometimes the transcripts you have of your academic time, it turns out the program wasn't an accredited school. So now you have to go back and do those credits all over again. So it's really, it's crazy. And so you have all these other issues that you have to navigate. And if you're just a regular social worker who has no concept of the troubled teen industry, I'm sure you'd feel like your head's underwater. So having even just, someone to help coach you, someone to provide the support, another one that I like is Kids Over Profits. That has probably the best history of the troubled teen industry, which, fun fact, started with a literal cult. So, and that's the other thing is because these programs, shut down, but they really change names and open again with the same staff, it's keeping track of things like that. That's been so hard over the years. I mean, even the program that I was in, it still lists my therapist as the program director to this day in 2024. She died in 2016.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So, and the other therapist from when I was there, I can't find any records of him anywhere. And he's not a good guy. So it's disturbing. It's troubling. And if you looked up Falcon Ridge Ranch right now on Google, you'd see that in 2020, a female staff was sent to prison for showing porn to minors at that program. And it's still open. Why? So, it's like anytime I see something that I can try to tie to the troubled teen industry to spread awareness, I try to. I know it's super annoying for a lot of other people, but, on TikTok, when I read the reviews, I say, I read these reviews so you don't have to, and so that you don't send your kids there, because that's ultimately the goal. You shouldn't have to read these reviews to know if a program's bad. Some of these reviews are just traumatic to read in general. So it's really to feel like I can do anything to save one kid is the way that I deal with a lifetime of regret. It's not the regret of the life I've lived, but that the life I lived wasn't really mine. I want other survivors to have more of a chance than I ever did. And my best friend works in the mental health field. So knowing that I have even just my own friends working in this field, if a survivor tells them about stuff, they know what it is, which is not something I ever experienced until in my 30s. So think about all the, I first asked a therapist for help with this stuff at 20 and I'm 34. So 14 years, I could have had an entirely different life. I hope that, my friend, if someone ever comes to him I hope that they get to 5 years 5 years more than I did, of really feeling authentically themselves, of really feeling like this isn't just trauma that you ignore or pretend didn't happen or have no one to talk to about or just feel like an outsider or feel crazy. I feel like, when I try to talk to politicians about the protections that I want to see enacted here in my state, if they don't know anything about it, I sound insane, like a conspiracy theorist. Like there are Doritos in my vaccines and kids being kidnapped and tortured in camps in the middle of the woods. Like, yeah, that I get it. Those things do sound the same.
Well, I'm super impressed with all of the work that you do and your passion for helping others get through this. It's really amazing. So, I have a couple questions for you. The first one is, and I think it's pretty obvious how we feel about the industry after talking, but if there are any parents out there listening who feel like they're at the end of the ropes and are maybe considering a program for their kids, do you have any words of wisdom for them?
I do, and I'm gonna try to I'm gonna try to make them bullet points and then dig into them. The first thing I'm gonna say is that because I also went to that boarding school, even if it's not a troubled teen industry program, sending your kid away is not the option. Because if you're thinking about sending your problem kid there, so is another parent. And that parent, I mean, you have no idea what that other kid's issue is going to be. I was only in boarding school for 2 months and I got kicked out because I was sexually assaulted twice in 2 months. So someone else's problem son that I had my own problems, it didn't really work out that well. On top of that, congregate care, which is what this is called, this concept of sending kids away into a group situation, it has been proven to not be effective, not for long term, and really generally not at all. So don't. Better options are community supports. Unfortunately, that's not really something the government's putting a whole lot of money towards these days. Looking back now, I think about the things that I found, the things that have guided me since then. If I were to suggest something for teenagers that are having problems, I start with thinking about how immediate and urgent and blah, 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 hormone brain soup, like I said. And when everything feels like the world's going so fast and you're lost, you need something that at the end of the day, you can see the progress. So my fiance is a roofer. I'll drop him off at work one day and pick him up at the end of the day. And there is the shell of a building in, 8 hours. And it must feel so amazing. I mean, he's proud of himself. And I'm proud of him because I can see all this work that he did. As a kid, if it doesn't feel worth it to put in the work for something that's not going to pay off right now. So finding things that make your kid feel like they're accomplishing something right now to combat the feelings of depression or feeling worthless, useless, whatever those negative feelings are that drag them down and make them feel like crap about themselves. Find some way that they can see what they're capable of in a shorter amount of time. That's the problem with these programs, is that they tell parents, it'll be like 6 months maybe, and it never really is. And you as a kid, you have no idea how long it's going to be. And they want your money. They don't really want to help your kid. Like, know that above all, it comes down to money. They're going to tell you whatever it takes to get your money. So I would tell parents to, first off, not send your kid there. Second off, really question the people you have telling you to do that. Because like I said, educational consultants, they can be working with your school, which is why, they already work with your kid. Why wouldn't you trust them? And there's only a few states, actually, I think it's just Oregon, that has any kind of transparency. These people are not legally obligated to tell you the truth or a truth that you and I would want to see. Yeah, okay, we've had some restraint issues in the last 6 months. Yeah, okay, maybe a kid died here 5 years ago. We both would want to know that, but they'll word it in a way that this seems kind of confusing. Essentially, if your kid's having problems, I know that there are some problems that it's not safe to keep your kid home, but sending them away is not the answer either, especially not far away. I would say if you have no choice but to send your kids somewhere else, make it somewhere close enough that you can visit. Because if you can't visit, if your kid is not able to talk to you, if you have trouble reaching a program that your kid is at to even talk to the staff, those are big, big, big problems, because think about what's going on behind the closed doors, you know?
Mhm.
So when your kid's closer, you can pop in whenever you want, whether they tell you you can or you can't. You want to do things like that. You want to make sure that your kid's not being abused, because they're going to say, your kid had these problems. We're going to blame these problems on why they needed this restraint, this sedation, this blah, 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 blah. And they're going to do their damnedest to convince you that your kid deserved it, flat out. And I think we can all agree that there's not a whole lot of problems out there that really deserve the kind of treatment that the industry provides.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then anything you would like to say to fellow survivors of the industry?
I think it is, I understand that it's really hard to get your story out. Not everybody wants to do that. I think that even if you don't want to get on a podcast and tell your story, even if you don't want to post your story anywhere, I think it will be healing in the long run to have a record of it for yourself. Because, I didn't want to deal with this sometimes. Other people didn't want to deal with this. You got other stuff you got to deal with. And at least for me, why would I deal with the trauma of 2004 when, there's the trauma of 2024 or the trauma of 2020? Like, there's always some new trauma and this stuff falls on the back burner. But I think that there's power in even just to yourself owning the story and saying, I didn't deserve that. And I don't think any of us did. I think I saw this quote the other day that has kind of been how I've been trying to navigate the feelings that I have, and trying to remember and unpack this trauma, because I feel sad a lot of the time. I feel a lot of grief for the life that I could have had and the person that I could have been. But it feels scary, and like, at the end of the day, I don't know that I'll come out the same person, but in the end, it's going to be okay. But it's going to be different. That doesn't mean it's not going to be okay. I think that there's power in acknowledging your trauma, even if it's just a bullet points, I entered on this day. These are the people that I remember. These are the staff that I remember. These are moments that I felt unsafe. These are moments I felt uncomfortable. These are the things that my therapist made me work on. Even just having some of that, maybe one day you're going to want to deal with it. Maybe one day you're not going to, but it helps. For me, I get naturally defensive when people try to tell me about their feelings, and I never really understood why that was. It's because of the attack therapy that they made me go through, where your friends tell you a problem that they see with you, and you have to just accept it. And I'm not very good at that. And like, that's a minor problem now, but it is something that's caused issues in a lot of my relationships. And if I had never sat back and reflected on the issues group and how those things went, probably never would have realized why I get so defensive, even when it's people that I care about that are telling me things that I need to hear in a way that's not hard to hear. It always feels like a criticism. It always feels like you're not doing enough, you're not working your program. And to be able to catch that thought when it happens and try to lower my own defenses, it's taken me 20 years to even recognize it, but it makes me feel hopeful that I can have my life and my thoughts and be my own person, the person that I was always supposed to be, this kind of weird person. I'm literally wearing mostly Hello Kitty stuff right now. And I'm 34 years old, but like, I showed up to the program wearing like the Muppets. So I still love the Muppets. I'm still the same person in a lot of ways, and I'm different in some other ways, but ultimately I just want to be me. And I think most of us in general want to figure out who we are and accept that person, and the program, is kind of a barrier to that. So even just writing down your story for your own records, whether you ever look at it again, it's a relief to get it off you. It doesn't matter if you want to dig in and remember, just having it out there and no longer in your head. I think that's that's a great thing. And it can be hard to do any kind of advocacy, and I don't want people to feel guilty if that's not something you can do. I think all I can ask of other survivors is advocate for the kids in your life. If you can't advocate for strangers, if you can't, just make sure the kids around you are okay. That's all anybody can do. If you see something, say something, you know?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Fairy. This has been, your insight is amazing, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to touch on? Any other thoughts?
Actually, the last message that I would like to leave everybody with is, if you're in the United States, this is pretty American, you know. I know that there are programs abroad, but a lot of the legislation issues are America and the way that we work. So if you're an American, I highly recommend that you go to kidsoverprofits.org, because that will have all of the currently passed legislation as well. So like Oregon, for example, has legislation that was passed to limit transporters, the goons, as well as the educational consultants, and provide transparency. So in terms of know your rights, know how to protect your kids, know what your state has and doesn't have. Know that if you're going to be seeking help for a troubled teen, you should know what is illegal. Restraints pretty much always. The only way that you can really protect yourself as a parent from this sort of stuff is to know what your state does and doesn't allow. And it's not always the easiest, but for me, that's where I'm starting, so that I can try to beef up the protections with, you know, sympathetic state legislators, because as we've seen, the federal isn't really working the way that we would like it to. So trying to just do the stuff in your own backyard and know your rights, I guess.
That's always good. Always good advice.
Yeah. I mean, well, and it's like, I really don't know. Like, my parents are lawyers, so I'm sure to some extent they looked up, you know, what their rights were and blah, blah, blah. But transporters specifically, you have to sign consent forms that say something along the lines of, if my child is injured in their custody or after being in their custody, you can't sue. If your child is killed or injured in the process of transport or after, you can't sue. And if you read that and think that that's worth signing, that's something to really question.
Yeah, just random folks that you don't know their background, you don't know anything about them, you don't know what kind of, you don't even know if they have car insurance, like,
if they're working turn signals.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing actually that brings up for me. So even when a program is responsive, like a parent's trying to call and talk to the staff all the time, you're likely just going to be interacting with the same staff, you know, the person who's always answering the emails and phones. That is not going to be the person who is supervising your kid when they have strip searches, or the person who's making their lunch. Like, the people that you as a parent talk to are not the same people that your child interacts with on a daily basis. 4 out of 4 programs, I can tell you that was the truth. So they're not even giving you, as a parent, the proper view of things. And at least here in Ohio, I think you only needed like 6 hours of training. And maybe not even a bachelor's. Like you don't. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to have any kind of training in psych. That's why you see kids also dying of dehydration at wilderness camps, because they don't teach the staff how to recognize dehydration. So just because it looks really good in the brochure, just because the staff that talks to you all the time are wonderful and know exactly what to say, well, that doesn't change that there's probably some guy that looks like a Duck Dynasty biker that's around your kid like 5 days a week and probably smuggling them cigarettes. Yeah, and he's never even read a psych book. So great guy for your kid to be around. Yeah. Listen, he read the autobiography of Walker, Texas Ranger, or something like that. You know?
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeehaw.
Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and let you go. Fairy, thank you so much for coming on. Were there any other things that you wanted to promote while we're here?
Like I said, kidsoverprofits.org. Absolutely wonderful website. If you want to learn more about the troubled teen industry, go there, look at your legislation.
Awesome. Yeehaw.
Yeehaw.
That's a wrap for this month's episode. Big shout out to Fairy for coming on and telling their story. This is a topic I wanted to cover for a while, so I'm really glad I got this opportunity. There are a lot of documentaries out there right now about the troubled teen industry. Personally, I'm thinking about rewatching The Program on Netflix because it was so good and it made me so angry. And yeah, a lot of fucked up stuff happening out there. So again, thank you, Fairy, for coming on and exposing what's going on. If you would like to be a guest on the show, you can email me at killizabeth.pod@gmail.com. That's KILLICABETH.pod@gmail.com. And we'll be back again in January with a more lighthearted topic for you. Until we meet again, stay safe.